What if the intricate symbols upon that enigmatic clay disc, widely regarded as the world's first instance of movable type technology, do not constitute the bloody declaration of war or the rigid property deed of kings, as is customary in the ancient world, but rather an astronomical rhythm map, murmured by a mother to her child, while gazing at the flawless mathematics of the night sky? To pursue the answer to this profound inquiry, we must descend into the heart of one of history's most elegant, most silent civilizations, one that conceals its secrets in the absolute depth. Right now, the heavy, resonant, and deep acoustic echo produced by a ceramic seashell, gently placed upon the cold, veined marble table before you is, in fact, the creaking of a door opening in the fabric of time, leading into the profound abysses of epistemological inquiry. We find ourselves in the Mediterranean of the 17th century BCE. You are standing within the eastern wing of the Knossos Palace, an architectural and engineering marvel rising upon the fertile and seismic soil of the island of Crete. This is a colossal, high-ceilinged study room adjoining the magnificent suite known as the Queen's Megaron, opening directly to the boundless expanse of the Aegean Sea. The air within is remarkably lucid, untiring to the human mind, holding a steady temperature of roughly 19 degrees Celsius. It embodies that flawless, smooth coolness of a Mediterranean night. Illumination is provided solely by the amber, faint, and tranquil light emanating from a single, masterfully shaped terracotta oil lamp resting on a bronze pedestal in the corner. This warm, deep obscurity is accompanied by the cold, patrician, and silvery reflection of the full moon filtering through the wide balcony doors. The olfactory landscape filling the room is not the familiar, stagnant air of an ordinary ancient enclosure. Rather, it is the slow amalgamation of the sharp, mineral-rich crispness of fresh lime plaster, newly applied to the walls, mingling with the earthy aroma of slightly oxidized pure olive oil burning quietly in the lamp. This entirely organic palette merges with the dense, salty, and iodine-rich breath of the sea, carried by the wind from the open balcony and crashing against the limestone cliffs directly beneath you, imparting a grave solemnity and an indelible patina of lived history to the space. As you advance toward the balcony with deliberate steps, you feel the seamless, cool surface of the precisely cut alabaster blocks beneath your feet. The external auditory landscape consists merely of the rhythmic, methodical, and distant crashing of the Mediterranean waves, repeating with the unerring precision of a metronome every single second. The immutable voice of this ancient sea whispers into the night the existential philosophy of Crete, and consequently, of the Minoan civilization, thalassocracy, that is, absolute maritime supremacy. While colossal contemporary civilizations, such as Egypt or Mesopotamia, sought to isolate themselves from the threats of the external world through unforgiving deserts, monolithic ramparts, or impassable mountain ranges, the Minoan engineers and administrators cultivated a vastly different, exceptionally audacious, and aesthetic defensive paradigm. They perceived these deep, indigo waters encircling the island as an insurmountable bulwark, a natural kinetic shield. Therefore, the most striking, the most radical anomaly that demands your attention when examining the architecture of the Knossos Palace is the absolute absence of any defensive wall, military tower, or trench surrounding such a massive, opulent complex, brimming with gold and provisions. The Minoans were anchored to the logistical and strategic protection of the sea with such unshakable conviction that they left no room in their architecture for fear, panic, or brute defensive psychology. This pacific, labyrinthine, and extroverted configuration of the palace is not merely an aesthetic preference. It is the petrified reflection of that unique, intellectual self-assurance afforded by an immensely complex maritime network. As a gentle night breeze passes softly over the massive wooden beams utilized in the palace's construction, you can perceive the deep, resonant groan emitted by those centenarian trees. These beams are not forged from ordinary timber. They were procured from colossal cypress trunks, meticulously felled with specialized bronze axes in the high-altitude regions of the island during the winter months when their resin content was at its peak, and subsequently impregnated naturally against decay by being washed in seawater for months. The Minoan architects sculpted these cypress trunks into a columnar form, unlike other ancient civilizations, in an inverted orientation, with the root portions positioned at the apex and the slender sections at the base. This singular inverted column architecture not only afforded structural flexibility, but also imbued the palace with extraordinary kinetic resistance against the frequent tectonic tremors of the island, those silent, deep seismic movements, by allowing the immense downward weight of the roof to be concentrated more densely at the columnar base. Within this high-ceilinged chamber, as you inhale the iodine scent carried by the methodical wind from the sea, you simultaneously achieve the full realization that you are standing at the epicenter of a silent, dense, intellectual archive, where the complex commercial ledgers of millennia past are preserved. This is an isolated sanctuary, untainted by the clangor of steel weaponry. A realm meticulously dedicated to knowledge, ceramics, textiles, and the observation of celestial mechanics. Upon the marble table, the clay tablets, bearing the symbolic records of the Eastern Wings amphorae, the olive oil harvests, and the transmarine copper routes, are arranged side by side in flawless geometric order. While the methodical wave sounds of the Mediterranean saturate the room, the dolphin frescoes, rendered with mineral pigment upon the fresh lime plaster of the walls, appear to swim and respire through the slow, oscillating interplay of the oil lamp's light. There is no trace of chaotic multitudes or hurried footsteps in this chamber. There is only the profound tranquility of an astronomer calculating stellar alignments, and the solemn, centenarian methodology of a scribe pressing seals into wet clay. As the wind continues to wander softly through the wooden beams, and the rhythmic waves of the Aegean slowly pound the island's limestone cliffs, we too commence a profound intellectual examination into the heavy silence of this archive, and the anatomy of those enigmatic clay tablets and perpetually undeciphered seals. In this high-ceilinged, east-facing study of the Knossos Palace, as the nocturnal hours advance, the passage of time decrescendos, transforming into a viscous, unhurried fluid, while the faint amber light, ascending ponderously from the wick of the bronze oil lamp in the corner, illuminates the cold, veined surface of the marble table directly before you. Your focus gravitates toward that terracotta-hued, circular object, resting merely a breath away from your fingertips. The profound silence enveloping the chamber is punctuated solely by the monotonous, second-by-second repetition of the waves arriving from the balcony, and the resonant, granular friction produced as you slowly rotate this heavy clay disc upon the polished marble surface. The deliberate rotation of textural imperfections, no larger than 1/10 of a millimeter, across the smooth stone reverberates through the acoustic depth of the room, embedding itself into your consciousness with the mechanical cadence of an ancient timepiece. This object before you is the renowned Phaistos Disc, unearthed from its millennial dormancy in 1908 by the Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier, resting just beneath a layer of ash in the northeastern corner of room number 8, amidst the ruins of the Phaistos Palace, a complex perched upon a hill dominating the fertile Messara plain in southern Crete. Upon touching the disc, The faintly granular, matte texture you perceive beneath your fingertips is, in essence, a temporal capsule harboring the microscopic geological records of the 17th century BCE. This artifact possesses an asymmetrical diameter fluctuating between 15.8 and 16.5 centimeters, accompanied by a thickness varying from 1.6 to 2.1 centimeters. However, to classify it merely as an ordinary ceramic fragment forged from baked earth would be a profound injustice to the extraordinary engineering it encapsulates. The primary material of the disc, the clay, is an exceptionally fine-grained mud meticulously selected from the alluvial soils of the island's south, rigorously washed to purge it of quartz and limestone particulates, and heavily laden with elite and kaolinite minerals. This highly specific mineralogical composition established the flawless equilibrium that prevented the clay from fracturing during the desiccation process, endowing it with an extraordinary plasticity. This object, currently resting upon the marble table, served as the theatre for one of the greatest typographic revolutions in human history, while it was still wet and saturated with moisture, long before its molecular structure was irreversibly transmuted into ceramic through the crucible of fire. As you subtly draw the lamp's light closer to the surface of the disc, you observe those cryptic symbols, inscribed upon both faces in a helicoidal spiral, with immense mathematical precision. A total of 241 impression marks, encompassing 45 distinct symbol typologies, walking figures, plumed helmets, dolphins, lilies, vessels, and vine branches. Yet, the paramount micro-detail demanding our attention here, with strict archaeometric gravity, is the precise methodology by which these symbols were embedded into the clay. In stark contrast to the cuneiform script fashioned by the Sumerians who gouged wet clay with triangular reeds, or the hieroglyphs painted onto papyrus by Egyptian scribes with brushes, not a single symbol upon the Phaistos Disc was manually inscribed. Every individual character was achieved by pressing into the wet clay molds that were individually cast, likely from gold or a hardened bronze alloy boasting a high tin ratio, through an excruciatingly laborious metallurgical procedure known as the lost wax technique. This represents the human intellect's first tangible encounter with the paradigm of movable type, materializing approximately 3,000 years before Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the printing press. Reconstruct in your mind the precise operational moment of this ancient artisan. Within the heavy, olive oil-scented atmosphere of the chamber, while the clay remained unhardened, that is, as its internal water molecules slowly evaporated, causing the capillary voids to constrict, the scribe was engaged in an unforgiving contest against time. The pressure required to imprint the metal seals onto the surface demanded an immense muscular memory and absolute physical equilibrium. Should the seal be pressed into the clay with insufficient force, the anatomical details of the symbol would render indistinct. Conversely, an excessively forceful application would cause the surrounding clay to displace outward, obliterating the adjacent character. Upon meticulous inspection of the disc's surface, one can distinctly observe those microscopic variances in depth, created as certain seals penetrated the clay, alongside the millimetric ridges left by the metal as it displaced the mud along its perimeters. Furthermore, such exactitude is present that the imprinting process followed a spiraling trajectory from the disc's outer edge toward its center. As the final symbols were condensed into the core, even the slight deformations induced by the desiccation rate of the clay were permanently etched into the thermodynamic structure of the disc. But to what end? Within the colossal storehouses of the Knossos Palace, the Minoans utilized the still undeciphered Linear A script to inventory olive oil and wine harvests, flocks of sheep, and grain quotas. Linear A was a strictly administrative and logistical accounting language, hastily scratched into the clay with a pointed instrument. Had a scribe merely intended to log a mundane daily record, they could have executed it in seconds using Linear A. Yet, for the Phaistos Disc, an entity or an institution striving to achieve the flawless three-dimensional anatomy of 45 distinct symbols, first sculpted their figures from beeswax, then encased them in clay molds, fired them in kilns, poured molten bronze into the cavities, awaited their cooling, and ultimately utilized these 45 resulting metal punches to stamp this clay matrix. The allocation of such a monumental industrial and metallurgical investment for the production of a single document yields but one conclusion from an epistemological standpoint. This disc was no ordinary administrative ledger. It was either the prototype of a sacred text slated for mass production, or an infinitely more profound astronomical or ritualistic canon, wherein every single word and symbol had to be transmitted to subsequent generations in a standardized format, entirely devoid of the idiosyncrasies of handwriting. As the gentle breeze rolling off the sea slowly dissipates the scent of olive oil within the chamber, the sheer coldness of that clay disc upon the marble table seeps from your fingertips into your entire physiological form, subsequently merging with the centenarian tranquility of the room. There remains only the relentless rhythm of the waves and the slow mechanical functioning of these heavy metallurgical details within your intellect. Everything has been calculated, everything has settled into its designated place, and everything has attained an immutable equilibrium within this silent archive. As you slowly lift your gaze from the profound intellectual weight generated by that cool and enigmatic clay disc resting upon the marble table, your eyes are inextricably drawn toward the deep, shadowed, and labyrinthine corridors stretching into the interior of the Knossos Palace. Within these dark subterranean passageways, far beyond the reach of the flickering light cast by the bronze oil lamp in the corner, lies concealed one of the most refined engineering solutions of the ancient world. In order to channel daylight and atmospheric circulation into the core of this colossal, multi-tiered structure, the Minoan architects eschewed the conventional practice of piercing the exterior facades with large windows. Instead, they engineered vertical, open-air shafts, known fundamentally as light wells. Maintaining windowless exterior walls provided a formidable thermal insulation against the island's severe southern gales. Concurrently, these square-plan shafts, descending uninterrupted from the highest elevation of the roof down to the ground floor, operated as colossal pulmonary systems and highly sophisticated lighting mechanisms for the interior domains. At this exact moment, in the most profoundly silent hour of the night, the cold, silvery illumination of the full moon filtering through the balcony doors strikes directly into these light wells, refracting sharply as it collides with the polished alabaster blocks lining the interior surfaces of the shaft. As the light cascades downward, rebounding off the seamless stone surfaces, it progressively loses its initial intensity, softening methodically until it spreads across the corridor floors like a fluid porcelain, establishing a flawless, mathematical gradient. This was not a mere aesthetic predilection. Rather, it constituted a rigorous mathematical calculation, dictating the optical choreography of light and shadow upon limestone and marble. The nocturnal breeze entering from the open balcony undergoes a distinct aerodynamic transformation as it navigates through these vertical light wells, engendering a microscopic fluctuation of atmospheric moisture within the shafts. It is precisely at this juncture that a new, exceptionally rhythmic and structurally profound acoustic stratum is added to the solemn tranquility of the space. The auditory consequence of condensation accumulating upon the lower limestone blocks of the palace, descending into a stone basin below at an exact frequency of once every 1 or 2 seconds, manifests as a reverberating hydrostatic echo. This sound is no ordinary dripping. It is a resonant, hypnotic pulsation that amplifies as it echoes upward through the towering shaft, emanating as if from meters beneath the earth, directly from the architectural memory of the palace itself. This methodical acoustic rhythm is subsequently accompanied by an exceedingly faint, almost imperceptible sound arriving from a vast distance, specifically from the colossal storage sectors in the western wing, the crystalline, glass-like resonance of giant ceramic vessels contracting infinitesimally against the nocturnal chill of the Cretan air. Guided by the reverberation of this descending water droplet and the ceramic frequencies, your cognitive focus drifts imperceptibly toward those boundless magazines. The immense storeroom situated in the palace's western wing. This sector represents the centralized repository of the Minoan civilization's logistical soul, the very economic spine of the empire. Along the length of these corridors, colossal provision jars known as pithoi, each exceeding 2 meters in height and boasting volumetric capacities of hundreds of liters, stand shoulder to shoulder in a state of flawless geometric regimentation. These vessels are far removed from the classification of rudimentary storage containers. Each one is an engineering marvel, synthesized from a precise amalgamation of Cretan red clay and a high concentration of quartz sand. Their exterior surfaces structurally reinforced prior to firing with heavy, rope-like reliefs. These raised bands serve no mere ornamental purpose. They function as critical structural friction ridges, engineered specifically to prevent these monolithic vessels, weighing several hundred kilograms, from slipping while being maneuvered via heavy ropes. The thermodynamics of the thousands of liters of olive oil and wine imprisoned within these pithoi are maintained in a state of absolute year-round equilibrium by virtue of the palace's thick limestone foundations. The subterranean soil, acting as a thermal buffer against the scorching summer heat or the biting winter winds outside, stabilizes the internal ambient temperature of the magazine strictly between 14 and 15 degrees Celsius. This rigorously engineered microclimate prevents any escalation in the acidity of the highly oxidation-prone olive oil, thereby preserving its delicate molecular structure across the centuries. One must naturally inquire, who administered this colossal, silent commercial machinery, encompassing tons of olive oil, thousands of measures of grain, figs, and wine? To extract the epistemological answer to this question, we must direct our analytical attention once more, with heightened scrutiny, to the frescoes rendered upon the fresh lime plaster, adorning the dim walls of our current enclosure. As the lamplight tremulates across the mural surface, those magnificent depictions, academically designated as the Ladies in Blue, slowly materialize from the depths of the night. In stark divergence from contemporary civilizations, the women of Minoan society were not relegated exclusively to a domestic paradigm. They occupied the absolute epicenter of religious rituals, maritime commerce, and the complex bureaucratic logistics symbolized by those towering pithoi. When we dissect the anatomical structure of the garments worn by the figures in the fresco, we bear witness to the staggering zenith achieved by the textile technology of the ancient world. The flounced, bell-shaped skirts, consisting of overlapping, tiered bands, along with the open bodice garments, were woven from exceptionally fine-spun linen threads. The manufacturing process of these textiles constituted an advanced discipline of organic chemistry and mechanical engineering in its own right. This textile architecture, constructed upon rectangular, warp-weighted looms by passing horizontal weft threads with millimetric infallibility through thousands of vertical warp threads, tensioned precisely by clay weights, is profoundly compelling, not solely for its structural durability, but equally for its complex pigmentation. The vivid chromatic spectrum of yellows and crimson reds present in the frescoed fabrics was derived from enzymatic dyes, specifically from the rare stigmas of saffron flowers harvested at dawn from the island's rocky slopes, and from the subterranean extraction of the madder root plant. The chemical stabilization procedure, known as mordanting, executed utilizing alum and wood ash to ensure the dye permeated the linen fibers at a cellular level, thereby augmenting its resistance against the corrosive effects of sea salt and ultraviolet solar radiation, stands as silent, empirical evidence of the Minoan artisan's absolute mastery over organic chemistry. Furthermore, the wave and lily motifs, embroidered upon the fabrics with strict symmetrical regulation, represent a direct materialization of the era's advanced mathematical geometry transposed onto textiles. The atmospheric density within the chamber grows increasingly palpable, weighed down by the continuous sound of the external waves and the unyielding rhythm of that hydrostatic drop echoing from the depths. The coolness of the marble floor, the sharp scent of fresh lime from the wall frescoes, and the latent awareness of those colossal olive oil jars in the Western magazines coalesce to establish a monumental intellectual gravity, a state of profound epistemological tranquility within your mind. The immense burden of knowledge stacks, layer by layer, akin to the meticulously placed stones of an ancient load-bearing wall. You are situated within the nucleus of an impeccably functioning mechanism. You are analyzing the very essence of that unshakable logistical soul, wherein every stone block, every droplet of water, and every linen thread is anchored exactly where it belongs. As time advances through the shadowed corridors of Knossos, it surrenders its velocity entirely, allowing history, complete with all its microscopic details, to remain suspended indefinitely within this deeply solemn silence. In this most advanced, most profound juncture of the night, within this high-ceilinged, east-facing archival chamber of the Knossos Palace, time unequivocally ceases to function as a quantifiable metric. Instead, it transmutes into a viscous, ponderous shadow, spreading imperceptibly across the cold marble floor, the linen wick of the solitary lamp, resting upon its bronze pedestal, which has illuminated the dim enclosure for hours, methodically consumes the final microscopic remnants of the oxidized olive oil, causing the spectrum of the flame to regress slowly from a warm amber to a deep, heavy crimson. This infinitesimal optical retreat permits the cold, silvery, and uncompromising reflection of the full moon, filtering through the open balcony doors to entirely commandeer the spatial volume of the room. Outside, within the labyrinthine corridors of the palace, that delicate hydrostatic dripping and the crystalline resonance of the colossal pithoi fade into absolute auditory obscurity. What remains is solely the methodical, unyielding pulsation of the Aegean Sea, striking the limestone cliffs after prolonged intervals of silence, repeating with a progressively deeper, systematically decelerating frequency. This monotonous and inexhaustible rhythm constitutes not merely the auditory signature of the sea, but the mechanical, unhurried heartbeat of the ancient world itself. Resting upon the marble table, flawlessly illuminated by the lunar geometry, the Phaistos Disc commands your final, most profound academic scrutiny. You focus your cognitive faculties upon the exact epicenter of the helicoidal spiral engraved on its surface, that absolute zero coordinate where the sequence simultaneously originates and concludes. Historically, the academic paradigm operated on the assumption that this complex sequence of symbols codified military campaigns, commercial treaties, or rigid monarchical legislations. However, when one fully assimilates the unarmed, unfortified, and entirely maritime-oriented intellectual elegance of the Minoan civilization, the true enigma harbored within this ceramic matrix reveals a structural delicacy far too systematic to represent a militaristic decree. The deliberate segregation of symbol clusters via vertical delineations unlocks an entirely divergent, immensely profound epistemological threshold in the minds of archaeoastronomers and linguists. This structural organization is not a sequence of prose directives, but rather a flawless, poetic metric system, predicated upon specific syllabic quantification, unshakable rhythm, and mathematical reiteration. At this analytical juncture, one must methodically reconstruct the maritime technology of that specific era within the theatre of the mind. During the 17th century BCE, an epoch entirely devoid of the compass, the astrolabe, or any rudimentary magnetic navigational apparatus, when the colossal Minoan merchant vessels set sail from Crete toward the Nile delta of Egypt, or the Levantine coast, plunging into the boundless, obscure expanse of the Mediterranean, there existed but a single, infallible cartographic reference to guide them: the heavy, macroscopic rotation of the nocturnal celestial sphere. For a master navigator standing upon the salt-permeated wooden deck, carved from Lebanese cedar and structurally sealed with dense pitch, surrounded by an absolute void of land masses, the sole navigational anchors were the millimetric angles established between specific stellar bodies and the marine horizon, the ascension trajectory of the Pleiades, the luminous intensity of Sirius, or the precise zenith of Orion at midnight. The flawless retention of this immense astronomical dataset, recalled with absolute zero margin for error amidst the dark waters, constituted the singular prerequisite for the survival of the vessel and its invaluable logistical cargo. Consequently, these symbols imprinted into the clay upon the marble table may, in fact, represent a phonetic map delineating the trajectories of those stars, a navigational sequence interwoven with rhythm to guarantee flawless memorization. The 8-petaled rosette symbol might denote a specific navigational star, the walking human figure, the lateral drift of a constellation along the horizon line, the maritime vessel, the exact geometric angle at which the trajectory must be altered during this cosmic rotation. Yet, how could one preserve such an immensely complex, critically vital mathematical sequence within the human intellect, transmitting it uncorrupted across centuries, during an era where parchment and written language were severely restricted? The ancient world's resolution to this problem was the most elegant medium of information transfer ever devised, that monotonous rhythm predicated upon acoustic repetition. Within this paradigm, the disc transcends the definition of a mundane text. It is the petrified, clay-sealed manifestation of a maritime incantation, a mathematically unshakable astronomical recitation, engineered syllable by syllable, measure by measure, to be transmitted across generations. It is the phonetic cipher of a repetitive melodic structure, murmured millennia ago in one of the stone courtyards of this very palace, by a mother to her young, unembarked child, while observing the night sky. A methodical cadence designed to etch the cartography of the heavens directly into the cognitive architecture of that child. The precise depth to which each symbol is pressed into the clay acts almost as the acoustic notation of this solemn chant, harboring its measured ascensions and descents. When analyzing the morphology of ancient languages, one observes how such rhythmic texts embed themselves into the deepest convolutions of the brain, and how the human intellect, when subjected to monotonous acoustic iterations, transitions into a state of profound, submissive equilibrium. It is exactly as the sound of the waves, filtering through the open balcony right now with their rhythmic, decelerated frequency, methodically dissolves your cognitive defenses, stabilizing your mind beneath the immense gravity of pure knowledge. The light of the oil lamp has now been entirely extinguished. The chamber is occupied exclusively by the pale, matte grayscale of the moonlight, reflecting off the dark waters of the Aegean and traversing the massive cypress beams framing the ceiling of this ancient archive. The clay disc upon the marble table is no longer a tense enigma demanding resolution, nor a stressful cryptographic puzzle requiring decipherment. It has reverted to an ordinary, physically dense, and empirical artifact belonging to one of the most silent, undisturbed instances of the past. The perspiration within the fingerprints of the scribe who deposited that disc evaporated centuries ago. The thermal energy of the imprinting metal dispersed into the ether long before our time. What remains is solely the solemn silence, the unshakable equilibrium of logistics, chemistry, and observational astronomy. The wind, passing through the colossal stone blocks of the palace, loses its initial hollow groan, resolving into a seamlessly smooth subterranean respiration. And thus, upon the cool marble flooring of Knossos, these ancient symbols encoded within the clay tablet enter a state of millennial stasis. This archaic, rhythmic incantation, sealed by the salt of the Mediterranean, continues to reverberate beneath the exact same constellation, beneath the identical celestial dome, devoid of any temporal urgency, precisely as it has for thousands of years. Now, the heavy, centenarian wooden doors of the ancient archives surrounding you close deliberately within the depths of your consciousness. You are anchored within the absolute epicenter of history's most unhurried, most solemn chamber, residing within an impenetrable sanctuary of pure intellect, while the chaotic turbulence of the external world dissolves beyond these megalithic walls. The night maintains its magnificent, crushing gravity over Crete and the boundless seas, exactly as it did 3 millennia ago. Time, within these walls, has ceased its forward momentum. Knowledge has ultimately achieved its state of absolute, immutable equilibrium.